Hi, everyone. I'm Christina Boston. I'm the recently retired Forest Service Wilderness Character Monitoring Program leader, and happy to be joining you today.
Yep, and I'm Colter Pence. I work for the Flathead National Forest. I'm a Wilderness, Wild, and Scenic Rivers and Trails Program Manager. I'm also the Region 1 WIMPS representative, and that's how I've connected with Christina on this work. Go ahead, Christina.
Yeah, so today's session um, is something that came about from discussions that we did have as part of the WIMPS, that Wilderness Information Management Steering Team. Um, we were seeing some people were losing a little momentum on the wilderness character monitoring implementation because they weren't really seeing how they could use all the things they've been doing yet. And so we thought it'd be a great idea to develop information to share about what all the great uses you have of your wilderness character narrative specifically and your wilderness character monitoring baseline reports. So we're going to focus on that in this session today. And as a refresher, just wanted to share this with you. And it's a linear progression of the stages of wilderness character monitoring implementation as it's laid out in the steps that are identified in the wilderness character monitoring element in wilderness stewardship performance. In practice, some of these steps may be overlapping or happening simultaneously. In this presentation, we'll be focusing on the product of the second and fourth steps that you see in this progression, the wilderness character narrative and the wilderness character monitoring baseline assessment. Wanted to share this also just as a brief refresher. Once you get to the end of that um, implementation to the 10-point or trend assessment report stage of implementation, then you enter into a recurring cycle of trend assessments every 5 years. And that's what's being represented on this chart that I'm showing you here. And we base the cycle of that on our baseline data year, not the year baseline assessments are completed. And they aim to answer the question of is wilderness character being preserved? This whole cycle and the trend assessments, that's what we're really trying to get at. Is wilderness character stable, improving, or degrading? And then once we understand those trends, we can analyze them and then use that to inform management actions and make data-backed decisions and take action or inaction, potentially in wilderness. So now thinking back to the arrow showing the stages of the WCM implementation, it may take at least 6 to 8 years from the start of wilderness character monitoring implementation before we have the first trend assessment and analysis that we can use to inform management. So it's a long process and takes a lot of investment to implement and may sometimes seem as though it's going to be a long time before you start getting information from forming management on the other end of the implementation process. So our intent in this presentation is we really want to highlight how you can be using wilderness character narratives and wilderness character monitoring baseline assessment reports now. You can be benefiting from the investments that you've made in the WCM implementation process even before you get into this cycle with your first trend data and then the ongoing cycle of trend assessments. So next, just as a brief refresher, I'm going to give you an overview of wilderness character narratives and wilderness character monitoring baselines. And then after that, Colter will be sharing with you some of the ideas and examples generated by the Wilderness Information Management Steering Team's WCM task team for using completed narratives and baseline assessment. So with wilderness character narratives, early in the process of implementing wilderness character monitoring, a wilderness character narrative is developed for each wilderness area. If you weren't part of developing the wilderness character narrative or you're new to your position potentially, I encourage you to get a copy of the narrative for any wilderness areas that you help to manage. Narratives were developed from discussions among local staff and specialists and the public and tribes and others who may have local knowledge of your wilderness area, as well as informed by review of important legislative and administrative documents. And it forms a foundational document for stewardship of the wilderness. The narrative is really the only opportunity to develop and present a holistic view of wilderness character that includes both the tangible and intangible aspects of wilderness character. The spiritual, symbolic, ethical, philosophical, and other intangible aspects of wilderness character are just as important, if not more important, than the tangible, but we really lack the tools to evaluate the intangible aspects in a way that can be used to feed back into practical management direction. So as the implementation of wilderness character monitoring progresses, we divide wilderness character in its component parts. So we focus more on those tangible, practical aspects of wilderness character when we're working on measure selection and setting up our baselines, especially those that directly link to wilderness stewardship and to the legal mandates of the Wilderness Act and policy mandates of the agencies charged with administering wilderness. The wilderness character narrative is a complement to these other WCM documents we produce, and it helps us to keep sight of the big picture. The narrative can be a touchstone for planning, monitoring, decision making, and it can help inform which measures should be selected for monitoring. Next, just a brief overview of wilderness character baseline assessments. The Wilderness Character Monitoring Baseline Assessment Report is a detailed technical report, and it documents the baseline values for the selected measures for your wilderness, and it's organized around the 5 qualities of wilderness character. The first year that data are compiled for all measures forms the Wilderness Character Monitoring Baseline and is the reference point against which change in wilderness character is assessed and evaluated over time. Ideally, the WCM baseline year would be the time of wilderness designation. Realistically, however, the WCM baseline year will likely be the first year that the wilderness character monitoring is implemented because existing wildernesses generally lag data that go all the way back to time of designation for most, or in some cases, even all of the measures that have been selected. So wilderness character monitoring baseline conditions are the starting point for assessing change over time without value judgment as to whether these are good, bad, or desired. For example, if a wilderness had structures or installations at the time of designation, those features would be part of the baseline condition of the wilderness, and then changes to those things would be tracked going forward. And then in the assessment report for the baselines for each WCM measure, it includes the wilderness measure type, the measure baseline value, the years of data collection, a measure description, relevant background and context, data sources, data adequacy, frequency of data collection, and the threshold for change that's going to be used for determining whether there's a trend or not. The measures selected and used in the baseline assessment, again, focus on the tangible, practical aspects of wilderness for which we can collect objective data. So that in a very brief overview hopefully gives you a refresher or a quick orientation as to the kinds of information that you'll find in these 2 documents that at this point most wilderness areas have completed. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Colter, and she's going to share with you some of the ideas that the WIMS team has been generating around this.
Yeah. So thanks, Christina. How can we apply these documents beyond their primary purpose, which she covered? How else can they be used? I'm pleased to say that for the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex, we have our narrative and baseline document completed, and we've started using it in a few ways. So these are some things that I brainstormed, bounced off of peers. We're going to share real quickly what those ideas are. And the last part here is we're going to ask you to help us brainstorm. We're going to go out of presentation mode and go into note-taking mode and have you share back what you're thinking. We're going to add this to a master list and hopefully share that out. So here's some applications. Outfitting and guiding in wilderness. There is often a needs assessment requirement, a commercial needs assessment, and narratives can help inform the need assessment. Narratives identify particular specific aspects of wilderness character and that can be used in your commercial services assessment. Here's an example. Our wilderness character narrative in the Bob Marsh Wilderness Complex identifies a particular specific version of primitive recreation for our area, not generic, but specific to our area. And that is safe recreation in grizzly bear country. That is one of the forms of primitive recreation we honor here. And opportunities to safely recreate in grizzly bear country and even view grizzly bears while recreating is one of those forms of primitive recreation that we've identified in our wilderness character narrative that we want to sustain, enhance, etc. And we then transpose that over to outfitting and guiding. That helps justify the need for outfitting and guiding, that there's people who want to experience this form of primitive recreation that's specific here, and that outfitting and guiding can help with that. So this is using that specific expression of primitive recreation that we've identified in our narrative to help us do a commercial needs assessment. A similar application, but an extension of it is the extent necessary analysis for outfitting and guiding in wilderness. In this case, we've used our wilderness character monitoring baseline document for the extent necessary component. Extent necessary answers the question of to what extent outfitting and guiding is necessary in wilderness. And if you're using what the framework, there's a 3-step framework that's out there for extent necessary. The third question asks about the state of wilderness. What is the state of your wilderness? How well preserved are those qualities, wilderness character? And what monitoring is in place to ensure the outfitting and guiding doesn't harm those qualities, or maybe they could enhance those qualities. Well, we've used our wilderness character baseline to fill out that question, to respond to that question of what is the state of wilderness and what monitoring is in place. We're using our wilderness character baseline to answer those questions. It offers the wilderness character baseline establishes the state and gives us some specific measures even to monitor for the future. For the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex, a handful of the measures that we've selected we think could relate to outfitter or guide activity. The acres of non-indigenous plant species, many of our outfitters use stock, so they are potential entry points for invasive species through them. If we're seeing increases in acres of non-indigenous plant species that we could tie to outfitting and guiding, well, then that would be a negative effect of outfitting and guiding in wilderness. That's our monitoring concept. And the index of recreation sites in primitive use areas, how many, how big are they? Has the outfitters enhanced that or degraded that? We actually think that they help concentrate use in some areas. So we actually think they're a benefit, and the monitoring of that measure is a benefit. And the number of authorized constructed recreation features. So how many corrals are there, how many hitch rails are there, et cetera. We're able to manage our outfitters and authorize specific things. And over time, our goal is to have fewer developments, and we're going to monitor that our outfitter and guides, they're part of the development scale through wilderness character monitoring. So that's how we're helping answer and fulfill the ask of the extent necessary is using some of the elements of our wilderness character baseline. Some more examples here. Christina already mentioned it, and that is, hey, if you're new to an area, read your wilderness character narrative. Use the narrative document to orient new to wilderness employees and even partner staff. As new staff onboard to wilderness units, reviewing wilderness character narrative will enable them to more deeply appreciate and understand the specific qualities of wilderness without making assumptions or getting an unprofessional assessment. Without such an orientation that's well prepared, the new staff person might be left to their own imagination about what embodies that wilderness, and it could inhibit their professional development. The narratives are very well done, all the ones I've read, and go far beyond the tropes and sort of ordinary understanding of what a wilderness is about. And another example here is wilderness character narratives could be used to inform a wilderness education plan, whether providing specific talking points and making that a more rich document, but it can also just be a full-on reference resource for your wilderness education plan. An extension of this, and I didn't put it on the slide, is we're using our wilderness character narrative and giving that to our outfitters with an expectation that they will translate that information and some of the information in there. It's their choice what they want to focus on, but they will use that as a part of their education programming for their clients. So using wilderness character narratives for education program delivery is the point here. A few other examples. They can inform travel planning, trails management planning, priority setting for trails. This is an example that somebody shared with me from the Southwest. I believe that they were in New Mexico, and they were referencing some of the very large impacts from the very large fires they've had for a number of years, and they were questioning which trails in their wilderness they would work to reclaim or allow to disappear from the landscape, given the reset button that the fire had pushed that reset button that was pushed because of the fire. Wilderness character monitoring baselines can be used to identify maybe long-term plans for wilderness for trails management. Should a trail in a post-fire area be reclaimed or let it reclaimed as and restored on the landscape, or should nature be allowed to play its role? Transient wilderness character monitoring could inform that. And maybe we have too many encounters with other visitors, too much trail density, and that's counterintuitive to our undeveloped quality or solitude quality. So we know that is an issue for wilderness character monitoring. So we're going to change how um, we're going to manage those trails going forward. Um, I'm going to go to the second column here. Improving engagement with resource specialists. Some resource specialists are not fully aware of how their specialty is relevant in wilderness. 44% of the Flathead National Forest is wilderness, and many of the resource specialists here think that's where they don't work. 44% of their job, as far as I'm concerned, is their job. But anyways, the wilderness character narrative offers sort of a soft entry point, I think, for resource specialists to understand how their resource is relevant and in wilderness and integral to wilderness character. And also that their resource that they're interested in exists within a context. So here's the example. Wildlife biologists might be pleased to see that wildlife species that they're very interested in is present and accounted for in wilderness, and that is a part of the area's wilderness character. But they would also see in the wilderness character narrative that there's a balancing act there. It's the wilderness character is not only about that wildlife species, it's also about untrammeled and undeveloped. So we'll say in the case of like mountain goats may be a part of an area's special quality, but we also value untrammeled and we also value undeveloped. We're not going to over trammel to protect the mountain goats. We're also not going to overdo it with the undeveloped quality to protect those goats. So they can learn about their resource in the context of the dynamic wilderness environment. But also wilderness character monitoring baseline identifies the ongoing monitoring that relates to their resource. There's maybe not a need to develop a new monitoring protocol or a new method that accounts for their resource. This is a local example to me. Our fisheries and hydrology staff have become concerned about one element of our fisheries resource here and felt that they wanted to start up a new monitoring element related to that. And we pointed out timeout. We do have some things going on already with wilderness character monitoring, and that is our watershed condition class monitoring that's required as a part of our wilderness character monitoring. And they realized, you know what, that is actually satisfactory. We will rely on that data and not stand up something new. A couple more applications here. Wilderness character monitoring can fulfill forest plan monitoring requirements for wilderness and even help with pre-assessment work. What is the condition of wilderness? Assessing that resource as you go into forest plan revision, and then the output afterwards. How are we going to monitor the goals, objectives that we have for this wilderness? Wilderness character monitoring can fulfill that monitoring requirement, and my forest has done that. So wilderness character monitoring is a requirement of our forest plan. And last, both of these documents, wilderness character narrative, but I think in particular wilderness character monitoring baseline, can identify opportunities for partnered stewardship work. Okay, these are some of the monitoring elements that we want to perform, that we need to perform here, and directing partners to those elements is strategic, right? And they can grow their capacity and funding and develop program of work around those elements and be more robust partners for us. So, I do have two more here. Hey, we're running out of time here. I'm just going to say quickly, wilderness character monitoring and narratives can inform minimum requirements analysis framework and the evaluation for for proposals of scientific activity in wilderness. It can help clarify what is special and worth more research in wilderness, and what's actually, maybe we already know a whole lot about this and it's not that much of a mystery to us. And it can also settle debates maybe on, here's an example. We have a proposal on my unit for 40 cameras in wilderness for wildlife purposes for over a year. And the original supposition was there's no impact to the undeveloped quality. Well, we would count that as a element for one of the measures in wilderness character monitoring. So takes away any argument that someone might try to say there's no impact to the undeveloped quality there. We will count it. So that helps me have to get out of a debate with somebody on that one. Okay, so we've just got a couple minutes left. We're really interested, Christina and I, in hearing what are your ideas? How have you thought about using wilderness character narratives? How have you thought about using wilderness character monitoring baseline assessments? Either you have started using them or you're thinking ahead. We're interested to hear what you might have. I'm going to go out of this full presentation mode, and if you have any ideas, I'm going to jot them down here.
Hey, Colter, good to see you. I actually had a question about how you touched on using it for the MRAF purposes.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that a little bit? Like, have you had experience doing that, or maybe somebody else has?
I actually took that idea from somebody else, so not me. But the understanding they gave me was it can help settle a debate over, yes, indeed, this is an impact. Like, you can't write that off as a third party saying, no, that's not an impact. You're being too extreme. Well, if we count it for wilderness character monitoring, that means there is an impact. That's the example that was given to me.
Okay, thank you.
And Colter, we have a comment in the chat from Rick. It says it was helpful while drafting a wilderness compatibility determination on section 6A, wilderness donation. And then we have another question that maybe we could address right at the end from Catherine. How can wilderness character monitoring assist in wilderness capacity analysis and/or outfitter guide needs assessment? As I think you touched on earlier.
Yeah, well, I did try to address that at the start. So at the risk of repeating myself, the needs assessment is answering what is needed by the visitors. Your narrative might very well identify what is needed, what is special, what the visitors, what do visitors need, or what is special about that area for primitive recreation that you want to then connect an outfitted opportunity with. So I gave the example of recreating in bear country. It's not just backcountry recreation here, it's safely recreating in bear country. So we have a need for outfitters to provide that service. If they aren't going to be able to provide a safe opportunity in wilderness for backcountry wilderness recreation, then that's not the niche we're looking to fill here. But they can if their visitor services are oriented around that. So I hope that answers your question, Catherine. And I appreciate this section 6A wilderness donation. I'm gonna look a little more into that. Thank you, Rick, for sharing that.
Yeah, if anyone has any final thoughts as we close out, I will say I have also heard someone tell me that they've used their wilderness character narrative in NEPA process, but I don't have too many details on that because that's not my experience.
I have one idea. This is Ron again. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Could they be utilized to expand wilderness if we have recommended wilderness areas that are in close proximity to this one, or even in some cases like attached to it? Could we lean on those narratives in the baseline to support that adoption or expansion?
I can
Yeah, go ahead,
take that one maybe. In other agencies, they are actually doing the same things in adjacent recommended areas with wilderness character monitoring, where they're developing narratives and doing the measures. We aren't doing that currently in Forest Service, but certainly I think you could take adjacent areas and the values, and if there's similar values in adjacent lands you're considering, you could use it to help inform that. But we're not doing it as formally as they are in some of the agencies besides Forest Service right now.